We're back with another exciting episode. We hope you're loving our content, and there's plenty more to come. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay notified about new episodes. Now let's dive into the podcast. Enjoy.
Okay, let's dive into something pretty fascinating today. We've got this source material that takes us right into the media and personal branding strategies attributed to Andrew Tate.
And it really lays out in detail the methods and tactics the source claims were used in interviews, public appearances, basically managing public perception.
Right. So our mission here for you listening is to really unpack this text. We want to pull out the core strategies it describes, these tools, supposedly for influence and, well, narrative control in this digital age.
Yeah.
What are the key insights here?
Exactly. And it's really, really important to be clear. Our goal is just to understand what this source says about these methods. We're exploring the techniques the text describes for, managing how you're seen. We're not endorsing them, not validating them, just looking at the information presented.
Got it. Crystal clear. So let's jump into the first area the source highlights. That's the strategic thinking behind choosing the right platforms for interviews. It's framed almost like strategic warfare, not just casual chats.
Yeah, the intensity is there in the description. This section details 3 sort of key factors the source identifies. First up is reach.
Reach, okay.
The ideal here, according to the document, isn't just talking to people who already agree with you. It's about strategically getting the message out to, well, fresh perspectives, new audiences.
Breaking out of the bubble.
Precisely. The text uses the example of appearing on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News. It highlights that as a major platform to push narratives, beyond the usual social media circles, aiming for a wide audience, maybe people unfamiliar with the ideas.
So it's presented as a deliberate push into new territory, even potentially less friendly territory.
Seems that way. The second factor the source gets into is the audience. Tailoring the message. You have to think about the platform's community, its culture, its mindset.
Right. Different strokes for different folks.
Exactly. The document mentions platforms like Rumble or the Pomp podcast, places where the audience might already be a bit skeptical of mainstream narratives. But crucially, the text says the strategy also targets the undecided. People who are curious, maybe, but not committed.
Interesting. So not just the believers.
No. It's about going where the ideas might land effectively, where there's maybe an appetite for something different, or so the source claims.
Okay, so reach out wide, tailor to the audience. What's the third piece?
The third is the interviewer's style or reputation. The source suggests actively seeking out interviewers who either, share similar views or, perhaps more interestingly, are known for giving space to controversial guests.
Like the BBC interview example.
Exactly. That's cited as a strategic gamble. The source acknowledges they'd likely be challenging, very critical, but it was seen as a chance to show, hey, I can handle tough questions. And according to the source, maybe even turn that scrutiny into a personal highlight.
Wow. Framing that as an opportunity.
Yeah. Finding hosts who can amplify the message or provide a challenging stage where, the source implies, resilience can be demonstrated.
So, putting it all together, the source's big idea here isn't just finding friendly spots. It's about strategically picking environments to make an impact, maybe provoke thought, expand influence. And it even says negative attention can be spun positively if managed right for the brand.
That's what the text suggests. It emphasizes this as playing the long game. The document highlights how effectiveness is supposedly measured, aligning the message, making sure it resonates, or maybe deliberately challenges that specific audience. Audience engagement, not just views, but the quality of interaction, who's sharing, debating, acting on it.
And the platform choice itself sends a message.
Yes, personal branding through selection. Each platform choice, the source argues, makes a statement, contributes to the overall narrative. It's presented as a very meticulous process.
Okay, that paints a clear picture of platform selection, according to this document. So once the stage is set, the source dives into crafting the narrative itself. It talks about turning every interview into a kind of chessboard to shape perception. Describing Andrew Tate as the ultimate storyteller, the top G, narrating his life supposedly with precision.
Yeah, this source uses some pretty vivid examples. It talks about that 2023 BBC interview again, describing it as walking into a lion's den, facing tough questions, right, on misogyny, the allegations.
Right.
The key lesson the source pulls out here is basically don't let your perceived enemies dictate your story.
And the strategy described was reframing his own life.
That's what the source says, countering the hard questions by presenting his life as, a triumph over adversity, referencing his background looting, poverty, KFC scraps, but framing it to highlight the rise through kickboxing, business, personal responsibility, shifting the focus.
To being the architect of his own success.
Exactly. And the document specifically flags that statement, I'm acting under the instruction of God to do good things. It presents that as a strategic move, an attempt to claim a sort of moral high ground, asserting control even when under attack.
That's one specific case. The source also brings up the Tucker Carlson interview on Rumble back in 2022.
It does. The document says the main goal there was illustrating his philosophy. The source describes him using that platform to really dig into his concept of the matrix. You know, this system supposedly designed to keep people down.
Positioning himself as a guide out of it.
Right. A leader showing the way to escape. The source quotes him, "Society wants to control you." And notes how this message apparently struck a chord with an audience the text describes as looking for liberation. The document really holds this up as a masterclass in pivoting away from personal controversies towards this bigger narrative about freedom, self-mastery.
And then there's the Aiden Ross podcast appearance.
Yeah.
That sounds quite different based on the source's description.
It does, yeah. The source paints that more as a performance, unleashing charisma, humor, a kind of audacity. It says he made light of controversies, maybe with a smirk or a laugh, trying to turn governmental negatives into charm.
And the wealth talk, the Bugattis.
According to the source, even that carried an underlying message. Look, this is achievable if you follow these principles. It suggests narrative control isn't just what you say, but how you say it, embodying this unapologetic, successful persona.
Okay, so connecting these examples, the source's core idea for narrative crafting seems to be, well, consistency and control, relentless control. Frame your story so challenges become stepping stones. Controversies prove resilience. Define yourself before others do.
And use every platform, friendly or not, to push your story.
Right. It's fascinating how the source states narrative isn't just about facts. It's fundamentally about perception. Control the perception, control the understanding.
That's the argument presented in the text.
Which leads right into handling hostile questions, another key area. The source describes this skill quite dramatically, like turning their spears into swords.
Yeah, it gets tactical here. Let's revisit that BBC interview, June 2023, Lucy Williamson. The source calls it a lion's den, high stakes, facing direct questions on misogyny, allegations, the strategy described, reframing.
How so?
Apparently, labeling the questions an ambush, a hit job. The source suggests the aim was to gain sympathy, maybe credibility, by positioning himself as unfairly targeted.
And didn't the source say he called out the BBC directly?
It does. It highlights how he allegedly accused the BBC of changing questions, presenting that as proof of bias. And when the interviewer mentioned Sophie, the strategy described wasn't just denial, it was an attempt to totally discredit her existence. She doesn't exist while staying calm. The source calls this crisis communication, attack the questioner's integrity.
Turn the tables. What about Piers Morgan in 2022? That sounds like a different dynamic.
The source notes Morgan tried to corner him on past statements about women. The strategy outlined here: humor and deflection.
Laughing it off.
Apparently. The text says he laughed off accusations, maybe gave a slight nod to potential offense. I understand why some people can be offended, but then pivoted fast to reinforce his own narrative. Things like, but I also believe in protecting women. It's my masculine imperative.
Disarming, but sticking to the script.
According to the source, yes. Disarm the hostility while doubling down on the traditional values message. Key tactic mention: maintain composure, stick to the story, no matter what.
And the Fresh and Fit podcast appearance. How did that fit in?
The source describes questions about business, past relationships, being used mainly as a launchpad to reinforce the core message.
Preaching, essentially.
That's the framing. The document quotes him saying things like, I'm not a misogynist, but I'm a realist. Framing controversial statements as just realism, or maybe taken out of context, steering it back to his ground, talking about building his empire, helping men, using the interview, even when on defense, to preach the philosophy.
So the source's big takeaway on handling tough questions. It's like crisis comms as offense. See every question as an opening. Stay cool, use humor or deflection strategically, pivot from defending to attacking maybe the questioner's premise.
That seems to be the core idea presented. Every attack is framed as a chance to show resilience, push the philosophy, build the brand, control the narrative, even under fire. Hostility isn't a roadblock, it's an arena to prove your mettle, as the source puts it.
Okay, this document also really digs into the use of provocation. It's described not just as, stirring things up, but strategically cooking up a storm, playing 4D chess. It's presented as a deliberate tool.
For making headlines, driving engagement, polarizing opinions, but with intent. The source gives that 2022 Twitter storm as a prime example. The tweet, "Women belong to men."
Which caused a massive reaction.
The source says the internet lit up like Christmas, outrage everywhere. But the document argues this wasn't accidental, it was calculated.
Calculated for what purpose?
According to the text, to draw clear lines, make a statement impossible to ignore, generate huge attention, followers, debates, media opportunities. Calculated controversy, used right, is presented as a powerful loudspeaker.
And there was another example from Fresh and Fit in 2023.
Yes, the source highlights him apparently doubling down on controversial ideas about masculinity, gender roles, even saying things like, a woman's worth is determined by how much she can help her man succeed.
Highly provocative.
Extremely. But the source calls it a masterstroke in the context of that audience and the strategy. It acknowledges the backlash, sure, but crucially, it emphasizes the wave of support and intense engagement that also happened. People talking, debating, sharing clips. The strategy, as the source describes it, was starting a conversation, but on his terms.
So provocation is presented as an engagement tool, but you have to know your audience inside out.
Absolutely crucial, according to the source, and it explicitly points out the fine line, the social media bans. They're framed as a big lesson. Knowing when provocation goes too far, it requires strategic risk, not just recklessness.
A wake-up call, maybe?
That's how the source presents it, prompting adaptation, focusing on platforms like Rumble, his own site, places where the text says he had more control.
So the real art, as the source describes it, is judging the moment, knowing when to push, when to pull back, gauging the temperature, so to speak.
Exactly. Provoke, to engage, to challenge, make people think. But no, when you risk alienating too many people, even your base, it's presented as a balancing act. Too much is noise, just right gets the conversation you want.
Right.
The conclusion from the source is, know your audience, know the platform, know the timing. Provocation is about saying what matters to who matters, ensuring you lead the discussion. And always, according to the text, with a clear strategy behind it.
The source also gets into this really interesting balancing act. Authenticity versus performance. It uses this analogy of a magician showing you a bit of the trick, but making sure you still believe in the magic.
Yeah, that's a fascinating tension, isn't it? How do you seem real while also being this larger-than-life public figure? Yeah. The source gives examples. It points to the Emergency Meeting podcast series.
Where he's alone, more direct.
Right. Sitting alone, talking about his Luton upbringing, struggles, sharing what the document calls his life's blueprint. The force suggests this is perceived as the raw ambition, the real Andrew. Those stories, KFC scraps to supercars, they apparently resonate as unfiltered truth.
But even there, the source sees performance.
It does. It notes the deliberate setting, maybe a Bugatti visible, the intensity of the delivery. These are presented as crafted elements designed to amplify the message's impact. The lesson drawn isn't that authenticity means being amateurish. It's about connecting genuinely while still directing the narrative.
What about social media like Twitter? How does that balance play out there, according to the source?
The source sees those sharp one-liners, the videos, "I'm a realist, not a misogynist," as representing both a genuine belief and a strategic message built for maximum impact online. The performance element, the text suggests, is maybe louder there, playing the provocateur character more overtly.
But the core beliefs are supposedly underneath.
That's the argument. Core beliefs on masculinity, work ethic, success, but dramatized, packaged for the digital age. The source basically says every public appearance is a stage. How you perform on it can amplify your perceived authenticity.
And the Piers Morgan interview comes up again here.
Yes. The source calls it a masterclass in this specific balance, describing him defending his views, but also being entertaining, challenging Morgan back. The performance was supposedly in the delivery, the laughter, the eye contact, the quick retorts.
Well, the message was the real Tate.
That's how the source presents it, showing he can hold his ground on beliefs and deliver a compelling performance simultaneously.
So the core idea from the source seems to be authenticity builds trust. Performance is the megaphone you need in public life. It's not about being fake, but amplifying your true self, your real beliefs, through a carefully managed presentation.
Be both the message and the messenger. And the source's trick, as it calls it, is knowing when to show vulnerability, like talking about his mother's illness, which humanizes him, and when to put on the mask of the super confident leader.
Reading the room.
Reading the room, understanding the audience, giving them what they need, whether it's the raw story or the polished persona. The source concludes you can apparently be both real and spectacular, the man who lived it and the showman who tells it. Building an empire, as the text says, of influence, not just money, by mastering this balance.
Okay, another really significant area the source details is handling legal battles publicly. Described almost like gladiator fights in the public arena, deliberately turned into a performance stage. These aren't just legal defenses, the document argues. They're chances to amplify the message, control the story.
Yeah, the framing here is really striking. Take the BBC interview again, June 2023. Confronted with allegations, the strategy described by the source was pure narrative control.
Not just denying, but attacking the process.
Exactly, discrediting the process itself. The text reports him calling it a matrix attack, portraying it as an attempt to silence a challenging voice, quoting him saying things like, "These allegations are from the same playbook they use against anyone who speaks the truth," framing it as part of a bigger war.
So, linking the personal legal trouble to a broader ideological fight against free speech or masculinity or whatever.
Precisely. The source claims this shifts the focus away from the specifics of the allegations towards this idea of an attack on his character exposing supposed systemic corruption. It's presented as aligning the legal issues with his main narrative.
How did this play out on the Fresh and Fit podcast, according to the source?
When legal stuff came up there, the source notes the strategy was a mix of humor and direct confrontation.
Laughing it off again.
Apparently, saying things like, "They're trying to cancel me because I'm teaching men how to be men." Simplifying the complex legal side for the audience, turning it into a clear battle of ideologies.
Making it about values, not just him.
Right. Presenting it as an assault on traditional values. The source calls this a PR battle. Communicate about the legal issues in a way that resonates emotionally, ideologically with your base.
And back to Piers Morgan one last time.
When Morgan brought up allegations, the source describes the response as framing it like, "I'm being attacked because I speak out against their narrative," presented as engaging in cultural warfare, making the legal fight symbolic of a larger societal clash.
Using the platform to talk about free speech again.
Exactly, right? Two opinions, law being weaponized against dissenters. That's the framing described by the source.
So the key skill highlighted by the source is just masterfully managing perception during legal fights.
That seems to be the crux of it. The source notes legal documents are dry, but a narrative standing up against the system that captures imaginations, framing the legal issues to fit the bigger message. Masculinity, freedom, fighting the matrix. It's crucial, according to the text.
And the media plays a role in this framing.
A huge one. Can be cast as the enemy, or maybe used as an unwitting ally. Engaging with the media, the source suggests not just as a defendant, but as a commentator on the state of justice. Questioning their motives turns the tables. The legal battle becomes a critique of the system itself.
So the source's bottom line: control the narrative. Use every legal challenge as a platform. Simplify the complex fight. Perception trumps reality in this game. Be legally sharp and masterfully communicative, turning every court appearance into a stage.
That's the strategy laid out.
Which brings us neatly to the final stage the source discusses, the post-interview strategy. The document argues the real game, the long haul, often kicks off after the interview wraps, turning those appearances into stepping stones.
Right. The cameras stop rolling, but the work continues. How do you keep leveraging that appearance? The source details several strategies after that challenging BBC interview in 2023.
What was the move then?
Immediate social media push, apparently coordinated with his team, posting specific clips, the ones where he felt he was most articulate or where he directly called out the perceived ambush.
Repurposing the content, controlling the narrative after the fact.
Exactly. Captioned with things like, "The truth will always come out." An offensive move, the source calls it, to shape how the interview was remembered. The lesson presented. Every interview is raw material. Repurpose it. Keep the conversation going, but on your terms.
What about after the Piers Morgan interview?
Straight to Twitter, according to the source, with a detailed thread, breaking down points, adding his context, maybe using memes. The strategy described was direct, rapid engagement with the audience. Show he was leading the discussion afterwards.
Framing it again. Media control versus personal destiny.
That kind of thing. Direct engagement keeps the narrative hot, followers invested, maybe even makes detractors curious, using every available platform for the follow-up.
And for the Fresh and Fit podcast. Yeah. The strategy there.
The source describes amplifying the positive reaction, releasing exclusive behind-the-scenes stuff prep, hanging out with the hosts, bloopers maybe.
Humanizing him.
Yeah, it makes him seem more relatable, the source suggests, while keeping the brand strong. And engaging directly with comments, positive and negative, turning those interactions into chances to push the philosophy more, responding in that signature style, if you think this is controversial,
Keeping the pot boiling.
keeps the conversation alive long after the interview aired, extends its life, builds that community around the content.
The source also mentioned handling fallout, like the social media bans. How was that framed?
That forced a strategic shift, according to the document, prioritizing his own platform's Rumble, his website, but using the ban itself as content,
How so?
framing it to show resilience, talking about free speech being attacked, rallying the base around this idea of being silenced, creating content like, they can silence me, but they can't silence the truth, managing the negative fallout by turning it into another rallying cry, reinforcing the use versus them narrative.
Okay, so summarizing this post-interview phase from the source. It's relentless. Personal branding is ongoing, proactive, not reactive. Every interview is just a launch pad. Requires immediate follow-up. Social media, exclusive content, direct interaction, always stay in the game, driving the narrative.
That's the picture the source paints. Every interaction, even after the main event, is framed as a deliberate opportunity to grow influence. It's not just about speaking. It's presented as leading, teaching, expanding reach, making sure you're remembered, not just fleetingly talked about, the goal described, becoming a legend, not just a moment.
Right. So we've done a real deep dive here into this source material. We've covered selecting platforms, crafting narratives, handling hostile questions, using provocation strategically, that tricky balance of authenticity and performance, managing legal battles publicly, and the crucial post-interview game plan, all presented exactly as described in the document we had.
That's correct. We've explored the specific strategies for managing public perception and building influence that are meticulously detailed in this particular text.
So given this incredibly detailed, highly strategic approach that the source describes for managing public presence, for shaping perception, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. How does understanding these kinds of calculated methods, as laid out in this document, influence how you analyze public figures, how you interact with the messages you see flying around in the digital world? What does the existence and perhaps the apparent effectiveness of these detailed strategies suggest about the very nature of communication and influence today?
Thank you for joining us in this episode, diving into the life of Top G, Andrew Tate. We hope you've gained valuable insights. Stay tuned for more episodes to come. You can grab our book on Amazon or Gumroad anytime. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, GenZ Creatives. Wishing you an ample dose of pain and suffering like NVIDIA's CEO. See you next time.